myself and Elisa are funded by the Mass Department of Public Health through federal dollars, substance abuse block grant funds, which come to the state. Our funds are managed through DPH and the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services. And what they did was they created regional prevention grant initiatives. So we are, as you saw in the first slide, Mass Call 3. The Bureau has funded many programs over the year, and we've listed them there over the years. We are the lead agency, Needham, with the towns of Dedham, Walpole, and Westwood. We partner with the public health directors, the public health nurses to assess and develop a strategic plan to reduce underage substance use. But what's important for today is that there are structures of how the federal government and SAMHSA has proven that community prevention works. But what Mass DPH did is wrote our grant through the foundation of equity prevention. So we are grounded in 8 guiding principles of equity and thus committed to having contracted with Nicole, who is an expert in her field, to bring, engage and bring underrepresented residents in our community to our table, engage them in our work. And that way, when we start to create and choose our programming, their voice is in our work, and our programming will have the greatest reach. So these are our 8 guiding principles. That is about all I promised Elisa we would say. We are grateful to have Nicole so that she is the floor. She kindly provided us with her packet 1. On page 3, you will see Nicole's bio. I do not have to read it. We're grateful to have her. And on page 5, it gives us the 3-session overview. So we will pass over to Nicole. I would let you know that we will be recording this session. We'll send the recording and Nicole's session 2 packet for next Wednesday in an email. Please feel free to share this information with your colleagues. We know firsthand what a tough time of year it is. And our goal is to spread this awareness and education across our 4 towns. So, did I miss anything, Elisa?
Got it. It's all you, Nicole.
Okay, wonderful. Well, hello, everyone. I want to thank all of you in advance for choosing to be here today. The most amazing thing about how our world has changed, Zoom lets you be anywhere and everywhere. And so I appreciate that you all chose to come here. This is the first session of 3 where really I just want to talk about what are some foundational concepts when we're having discussions about equity that I think are important. Hopefully everyone did get the packet, and if not, I'll make sure you guys get it. I want to invite everyone to grab their phone. You can use your camera part of your phone to be able to have this QR code link you to me through social media. I use LinkedIn a lot, so if you're a LinkedIn fan, feel free to connect with me there, but this will also give you access to like my email, for instance, if you want to send an email. I'm the founder and CEO of RIZE Consultants. My area and work is in substance misuse prevention. I'm in public health. And because of my life experience, it intersects with diversity, equity, inclusion. And so this has been a life work for me that I'm excited to be doing, and it's been really, really great. Just exploring all the ways we can kind of raise our consciousness, understand the influence and impact of trauma on our work, historical trauma and individual trauma. And then also for me, it's about seeing a path forward into the future. And that's why I created this whole concept around equity in action and how do we bring this work to the forefront. Before we get started, I do have one thing I like to share, and it's a note about land acknowledgement. I am always learning, and at the end of last year, land acknowledgements were brought to my attention in a way that I'd never really thought about before. And so I am not going to do a land acknowledgement because I don't believe in that. That'd be very cliche. But what I do want to do is to share a quote with you that was profound for me, that really raised my consciousness around what land acknowledgements are and why people might be using them. So it says this: it's important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land, and to seek your understanding within that, to understand your place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in the past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. And this is from Northwestern University. And I thought this quote does a really good job of summarizing the concepts behind land acknowledgement. And so what I encourage people to do is to find out for yourself, what is the land that you reside on? So that you can understand the history of the land, you can understand the trauma, because truly, you all, if we're going to really think about the concepts of equity, the concepts of restorative prevention, the concepts of what it means to address disparities, we have to be willing to be honest about our history. So this scan here takes you to a map where you can actually put in your address. So you can do it for your own home, or you can do it for your business. Okay, whatever agency your physical building is on. And this will give you a sense of who were the first peoples that lived on the land before it was appropriated or colonialized. I always struggle with that word, colonialized. So I like to share this with folks. That way you have a sense of that own knowledge and history for yourself. Okay, so as we get started, another thing I like to do, and if you're with me for all 3 sessions, I do this every time, mainly because we are at 12 o'clock in the day, and I'm sure everyone has had a full morning. So I like to take a moment to center ourselves so that you're not, while we're here, thinking about the emails you need to answer, the stuff you need to do at 12:01. Okay, I'm going to ask for your full presence in the moment while we're here in this space. And so for this first activity, if you have the notebook, it's already in there, but if not, just grab a piece of paper and you're just going to make a quadrant here for it. Okay, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. All you'll do is write your responses to these 4 questions in the boxes. You won't share it with anyone, but it's just to kind of center us and get us prepared for our time together and what we'll be talking about. So the first thing I'm gonna have you do, I'm gonna set just like a 30-second timer, because the reason you're seeing a spiral here is in the middle where the 2 lines cross. I'm gonna have you draw the tightest little spiral there. Okay, just for 30 seconds. Now you'll be surprised, you all, 30 seconds is not that long, but you'd be surprised how long it feels when all you're doing is grounding yourself, breathing, and taking a moment. Okay, so I'm going to start the timer now, and you'll just draw the tightest little spiral right there in the middle. Make sure you're breathing. Okay. All right. So in the top left corner, the first question is this: when you think of health equity, what comes to mind? When you think of health equity, what comes to mind? Okay. In the top right corner, what fears do you have about prioritizing equity? What fears do you have about prioritizing equity? Okay. In the bottom left corner, what do you think is our biggest potential for change? What do you think is our biggest potential for change? Okay. And then the last question is, what are you hoping to learn from our time today? What are you hoping to learn from our time today? Righty. Okay, so thank you all so much for doing that short grounding activity with me to really kind of set us into the room and our time and space together. So there are three main things I want to do. I first want to talk about why we are discussing equity versus the word equality. I have some foundational terms I'll share with you, and then we'll leave the end of it to kind of reflect on how do we take what we've talked about today and apply it to practice? Like, what does it actually mean in your everyday work? So the first is thinking about equity versus equality. Now, I came across this graphic just a few years ago, okay? And I had always traditionally seen the graphic with the fence and the boxes. And I'm sure you all can imagine what I'm talking about, right? But this one really, I love it, because if you consider, which is the same thing the other graphic says, I feel like this visually articulates it better. When we focus on equality, we look at a community and we say, you know what? We have created a bicycle, everybody's getting a bike. And that's how we do our work. That's how we do our programming. The challenge with this approach is, as you see visually here, the bike we've created really only works for one person. Okay, so we're missing like 75% of the population when we do this type of approach. And really for me, I had not thought about it this way until I saw this graphic. And I started thinking about, when I create programs and community initiatives, how often am I missing the majority of the community because I just chose one thing to create? When we focus on equity, this really helps us think about the fact that differences exist in people, the fact that everybody's not born with the same ability or same resources. And as a result, we craft our solutions to best fit the audience. Now, probably the biggest challenge with equity, you all, is, as you see, we had to now create 4 different bikes. So the important thing for us to think about and consider when we prioritize equity is recognizing out the gate that the resource allocation is going to change. And that's an important thing to think about, because truly, you all, we've gotten used to the concept of equality. It's easy. You make one thing and you distribute it to everyone. And equity requires us to really look at our resources differently and allocate them differently. And I think when we talk about leadership and we talk about support for this work, this piece has to really be communicated. Otherwise, people are like, oh my God, it's so much more work. Yeah, it is. It really is. However, I think it's a really important concept to understand. And so I have a really short clip I want to share with you. This comes from actually Minnesota. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota is doing some amazing work in equity, you all. They have a whole series on YouTube. This clip here, I think, does a great job of articulating equity versus equality, and I want to share this video with you all.
I've come to think that most people believe that everyone deserves the same opportunity to achieve good health. That we should all have what's necessary to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. That we should all be given boots that fit. And that's when I learned the difference between equality and equity. See, one ensures everybody gets the same thing while the other ensures everybody gets the something they need. Take 3 neighborhoods. Each one is situated across from the grocery store. One has no transportation system and the streets aren't safe at night. One needs a boat to get there, and one is positioned a block away. Equality says, we hand them all boots and tell them to make do. One-size-fits-all solutions for problems that require more than one resolution. But equity, the quality of being fair and impartial, speaks to access. Equity speaks to safety. Equity speaks to transportation. Equity speaks to understanding. Equity speaks to the actual human condition.
Okay, just powerful, right? I think the video does such a great job of describing this. And when I was thinking about the video and the communities, right? I think about the communities we serve. How many of them are, associated in spaces that need transportation support, that need additional resources. And yet we don't truly take a comprehensive look at that when we're doing this work. So I like to always start there because I think it's important for folks to recognize that when you make the decision to prioritize equity, it does create a shift in how you think about your resources that you need to have at the table. So any questions or thoughts on that? That's good. Okay, cool. All right. All right. So here's some foundational terms. There are 4 main terms I want to discuss today. The first being a health disparity. Thank you. I love the video too. It's one of my favorites to use. So the first I want to talk about is a disparity. The key thing to recognize about a disparity, you all, is that it is a preventable difference in a health outcome. And that's the main part of the definition. And primarily it's the fact that when you look at the differences, they're based upon things like race and socioeconomic status, geography, whether someone's rural or urban. And when you really think and consider it, a disparity is occurring because of those differences, not for a biological reason. And that's the key thing to recognize about a disparity. My background's in public health, so I've always found disparity data really fascinating and a bit odd, because I feel as though we look at disparity data as if it is a description of a community, versus recognizing that typically disparities are showing you that there are social inequalities happening in a community. And that's why that particular community is having more negative health outcomes. So I wanted to share with you all an example of a disparity. And the one I like to use the most is HIV, only because it's been around for a long time now, especially after the initial 80s, where the trend HIV and how it looks has really changed. And so what I'm going to share with you all here is some data for the state of population versus HIV diagnosis just in 2019, just so you can see the demographic differences one by one. And this is the epitome of disparity data, you all. Okay. What I find fascinating is you can do this in almost every state across our country, and the data looks about the same. That despite the fact that folks of color make up a smaller group, there's an overrepresentation in HIV diagnosis in comparison. So what's interesting is that you can look at this for other measures and other proxies. My world focuses a lot on substance prevention. And so there's intersectionality between HIV risk and substance use, but you can do this with other types of health conditions. And to me, this is a really great way to see, wow, even though this population makes up this amount, I mean, for me, I'm going to go back a slide here, because what's interesting, if you think about it, Massachusetts is not exceptionally diverse when it comes to race and ethnicity, However, when you look at some of the disparity data, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you, even if you look at any of these, how do you make up 12% of the population, but 27%? or even 7% of the population, but 32%, right? So these are the things we look at when we're looking at disparities. And what I like to consider is the why, and that's where you begin to look at the connection between disparities and our second term, which is focused on inequity. Because what data typically shows is that it is because of health inequities and social inequities that disparities exist. Because what your inequities are, this is the unequal access, the unequal distribution of resources in a community, whether that's housing or transportation or schools. Okay, there are really strong connections between the strength of a school, the performance of a school, and health outcomes, the performance of the school and other long-term outcomes that we look for. And so I like to really kind of think about this. When I see disparities, the first thing I say is, man, what inequity is this connected to? Because there's a reason this is happening for this community. And if I'm going to create community change, I've got to know the inequities that are occurring. Okay. So the third term I think that's really important to consider is the social determinants of health. This is a topic that's become of great interest to me, mainly because I think a lot about inequities. And I feel the social determinants of health creates a framework for understanding all the different influences, the domains that either promote your health and wellness or limit it. Okay. And so the official definition of the social determinants of health really looks at what are the resources, how are they distributed across the community, and do these resources help to extend life and the quality of life for the person. Now, with the social determinants of health, there are actually 5 domains in this, and they're listed here. And so what I like to do when I talk to folks who are really attempting to look at equity is to begin to do an evaluation of your community and how does your community look across these 5 domains? Because this will give you the first clue into the opportunities. Because if a community has low access to quality education, low access to healthcare, you all can already imagine the ways in which that impacts a person's life long term. So for me, I feel like the social determinants of health gives us a really great framework for identifying where social inequalities are occurring in the communities we serve. Okay. So then the fourth term that I think it's important to share with you all is this concept around structural inequalities or structural inequities. And so I want to share this, and technically this term is a grouping of terms because as you start to dive into equity and restorative prevention and trauma-based ideologies, you can't help but to unpack some stuff, specifically in America. Okay, this is a country and the history we live in. And so when I think of what are the structural inequities that are creating the disparities, that are creating these adverse outcomes, there are 3 main things we got to think about. Okay, we've got to think about our systems, our structures, and then us as a society as a whole. And so I want to describe what these 3 terms are and to help you begin to think about how they interact with each other. So the first is systems. All right. The reality is we live in a world full of systems. Okay, we have our educational system, we've got our healthcare system, we've got our judicial system, right? Just to name a few. So our society is built on a network of systems that creates a framework for our principles, our procedures, how we do things, even to the point of how grant money is distributed into a community, right? So a part of this work, you all, if you're really going to look at the inequities, is are there any structural inequities? Are there any systems that continue to perpetuate inequities in our community? And I think this is a perfect thing to kind of be thinking about as we're really addressing equity. Because I think it may require us to dismantle some systemic stuff that has really kept some people doing well and some people not doing so well, right? And if we're wanting to make a change in that distribution, we've got to start thinking about how the different systems work together and what they are. And so I think this is something that's become of interest to me here in the last year, mainly because I'm interested in how do we actually continue to make movement and change in society. And I think some of it is understanding the systems that are in place. The other term to consider are the structures. Okay, so if you consider that our system are the framework, the structures, these are the institutions and agencies that carry out the will of the system. Okay, so for instance, we said the education system, right? An institution would be a school. In the healthcare system, an institution would be Department of Public Health, right? Or a hospital, for instance. Okay, so most of us are employed by the structures. Okay, we're employees of the structure, and we are a part of a larger system. So a part of this is beginning to think about, what are the structures in place? Do we need to have any look at some of our policies and practices that might be pushing out inequity that we not have thought about before? And this has become really important to me. And I'll share a more recent example, you all. I'm moving into the grant and 501c3 world, which is its own system. Okay. And what I found out most recently, I had no idea that grants were reimbursement only. Okay. So the situation I found myself in is having applied for a grant, won it, got it, great. And now being told, oh, well, you have to have the capital to pay first, and then we pay you back. And I said, well, help me understand. Typically, wouldn't you think it'd be communities who need money that are applying for money? Right? So these are some of the things that happen. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea this was the system connected to grants, and just thinking about how all these things interconnect with each other. So that's just an example of something I'm experiencing right now, where I'm looking at, how these things connect with each other and how these structures are set up in a way that unfortunately doesn't always help agencies and groups and communities. And so then our last term with this is thinking about society, and truly society is us. We make up society. We are the people who are living in this orderly system. Okay, we're people who are having the jobs inside the structures and institutions. And so the reason why I think this term is so important is because sometimes, you all, I know for me, I look at everything that's happening, I look at the system and the structures, and sometimes it feels overwhelming. Like, what can I do? I'm one person. And even if I am the director or over an organization, like, what can I do? It feels so big. And I think sometimes we forget that we, the people, make up society. And I do believe that understanding that we make up society, we set the rules, that it gives us a little bit more courage to be empowered to say, you know what, if I am seeing things in the system that don't seem to be fair or don't seem to be equitable, that I have the courage to stand up and say something about it. Okay, so those three terms kind of connect and intersect with each other, and I think it's important concepts for folks to kind of mull over and think about. I wanted to plant this seed for you all today as you think and consider moving forward. So I want to offer an opportunity for reflection here. And there's two ways we can do it. I'm going to show you all Mentimeter, which Mentimeter will allow you to respond on your phone anonymously. So if you scan this code, it'll just show up on the screen and nobody will know who said it. If that is a concern for you, feel free to use that. If people want to just talk and share their thoughts, feel free to do that too. But I'd love for you all to think, now that I've described this, like, what are some of the structures and systems in your work? Just based upon what I've described here, what have you seen? So hopefully everyone's got a opportunity to tag here. So I'll leave this up. If anybody wants to reply, feel free to use your voice too. We're an intimate group here. We're all friends. But if you want to submit it anonymously, by all means, feel free to do it on Menti too.
I have a quick clarification question. Sorry.
Yes.
So is it structures and systems that create, or that we feel create health inequities, or just like generally, what are some of the structures and systems?
You can answer it both ways, actually. I was thinking generally, but it'd be if you already have identified or can think of some that are creating inequity, but please do share that too.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah. Great. Any thoughts from folks on this? Oh, thanks, Trish. Good to see you.
I just am thinking of a program that I work with that's peer mentoring, the video and the issue of transportation is a big one that
Yeah.
that we definitely, it's an area that we don't have, although there's definitely a need for it. So that was one that just sort of popped out at me.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's sometimes a lot of the challenges, especially depending if your community is rural or not, income. And I think sometimes what can be a struggle is we have these great ideas for grant programs, but because we're not looking at the social determinants, our grant focuses on the one thing, but then it's like, well, how do people get to the thing that we've created lovely for them, right? So I appreciate you sharing that perspective of something you're experiencing right now too.
I have one.
Yeah.
So we're just closing out a vaping grant from the public health department, and one of the structures or systems that's in place for youth is the MIAA, which oversees the sports. So they still have a really punitive approach to vaping.
Okay.
So I know there's a lot of different things that happen as a result of it. Most of it meaning it's hard to get students to raise their hand for cessation help. That's one thing. They even carry over the punishments into, you could get in trouble in August and be punished in your sports season the following spring.
Wow, really?
So
Very interesting. Okay. Yeah. I can see how that would create inequities for sure. And stigma, yes, Carol.
Thank you. I am thinking about our goal and premise of bringing underrepresented, marginalized, traditionally residents in our community to engage in our work. We traditionally have meetings that are, either during the day or early in the morning, or the barriers to even participating just at the very front of this all are just huge.
Yes.
So that just popped in my mind, like it naturally keeps people away.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that one specifically, Carol, because that one comes up a lot. I think about, I've always worked in prevention spaces where the purpose and intention was either for youth or for parents. Yet most of the time that we held our meetings, it was during our workday as the professional, right? And so it's so interesting how that disconnect exists there. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing how that happens. And then if we do offer it, do we think about transportation? Do we think about childcare? Do we think about all these other things that the person is inconvenienced, when they're attempting to access our services? It's just like, wow, these are the things we don't think about coming from the place of privilege, truly, as the people who are working the job, So it's like, what works for my schedule? So it's very interesting stuff. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts or comments on this piece right here?
I don't know. I hope I submitted something via Menti, but maybe it didn't go through. If
Oh.
not, I'm okay with just saying it because it's not like sensitive information.
No
or anything.
worries. Yeah. Please, I'd love to hear you speak.
Yeah, of
Sorry,
course.
Menti didn't pull up for you.
No, that's okay. I've been having issues submitting forms on my phone, so I think it's on my end.
Okay.
I was saying, This was a result of like a health equity assessment our coalition did internally. That there's, I think like information systems was one that kept coming up as like information that is shared officially through town channels only being available in English, and even like
Yeah.
flyers and other things more being posted in places like in neighborhoods, like not like intentionally speaking, but just like where the town hall is and stuff like that, in a neighborhood that already tends to be like more well off. So people who speak different languages, people who aren't already like usually in town hall, might not be getting that info. And then transportation. I know that I've worked with the youth commission to offer transportation to some of our events before, but it's sort of like on an as needed basis.
Yeah.
It can be difficult, but especially for kids with parents who are working, to sometimes find transportation to our events.
And to your point, when you think about the concept of as needed, that requires the person to ask.
Yep.
Right. And so just thinking and considering what it takes to ask for help when there may already be shame about needing help. So it's like, these are some of the things and spaces around our work that I don't think we always think about. It's like, instead of it being a part of the planning process, it's like, oh, if it comes up, we'll add it then. But it's like, what does it take for someone to ask for it? The vulnerability to step into that space to ask. And I think a lot of people just choose not to ask us, and it becomes an underutilized service. But I loved everything you said about English as the primary language for almost everything, and I feel like, Carol, we had talked about, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I feel like something that had been talked about was the fact that you have documentation that English is not the only major language being spoken, and so how are we providing services and options in some of the languages that are commonly spoken amongst populations in the region, in the area?
I have like one very quick like anecdote that sort of illustrates that, at least at our town. This was years ago, so I know that there's been strides since then, but I remember one time someone called, and please don't share this outside of here, but somebody called town hall main line, and I happened to be in the office when my colleague answered the phone, and the woman who called spoke Spanish, and she didn't speak English, and there was nobody available who could help her. Like, we were like, oh, like, who's so and so, like, she speaks Spanish, oh, she's out today. Like no one was able to help this woman who called in. And it's not that everyone needs to speak Spanish, but the fact that like there were no systems in place, or there was no protocol in place to be like, okay, someone calls us in a language that is not English, and what do we do?
Yeah, what do we do? Which in some cases is like, we do nothing.
Yeah.
Right, because we're not prepared to do anything.
Had like Google Translate out on their phones, and I was just like, oh my god. And again, please don't share this outside.
Yeah, no. And truly, that experience is not unique to the one that you just shared, unfortunately. Yeah. Carol, you had a thought?
Yes, and mine is similar to Chrissy. Chrissy is Dedham Public Health, and one of our 4 towns. And I often will frame these type of things too where I live. And we have food cupboard delivery and outreach and prevention, which is similar. And I find that, say, when I'm volunteering in my town delivering for the food cupboard, there are huge language barriers, and the structures aren't even offering me or these folks any kind of translation or support. I deliver, but there's so many services that we're trying to provide, say in my town of Medfield, where we don't have the opportunity to engage and pay for people that can speak in a native language to communicate with people. And I find that it's the same across our 4 towns, that my training says when I offer a focus group, I should say, please let us know if you require translation, by 9 days before.
Mhm.
And then I'm responsible to get that into place.
Right.
The most recent focus groups, and I'm going to be candid, that we did through the 4 towns, through the housing, family housing, affordable housing, we didn't even put that on our flyers. And, someone like me, like, I know better.
Yeah.
I have to strengthen the muscle to remind myself, which is why we have you too, Nicole, and these
Mhm.
programs, to say, hang on, what's the barrier here? Why aren't we getting people?
Yeah.
Because 9% of those folks don't even speak English in that
Mhm.
place. And I'm not even considering them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Powerful stuff. Thank you all both for sharing, and everyone for sharing just kind of this thought process around this. I think taking some time to think about it helps us unpack and helps us identify opportunities where there's growth that can happen. So cool. Good stuff. All right. So the last thing I want to do, really, you all, is to give us a moment for thinking. I call this applying knowledge to practice. I think the ability to think, you all, is our most beautiful asset. It's what makes us human. And I think we don't take enough time to truly think and process. So I'm going to push to the second question, because this is the question I really want us to kind of think about as we are closing up today. We've talked about equity versus equality. I've shared some foundational terms. I'd love for us to be thinking about, what do you believe you can do with even just information you've learned today? Because this whole series is called Equity in Action, mainly because I've been doing this diversity work for a long time. I've lived it because I have brown skin. And then I remember the days of cultural competence. I was doing all sorts of trainings. It was great. I remember cultural competency. Okay. But truly, you all, it has felt, thank you, Angie, for coming. That phase of my life felt no different than how we are required to do the OSHA trainings. You do bloodborne pathogens and, the checkbox of trainings. And it's become important to me as I get older that the work I do doesn't just become a checkbox training. So what I really want us to think about here in our last bit of time together is, what can you do even with the little bit of conversation we've had today, and to begin to share that. And again, feel free to put it in Menti, the chat, or I'd love to just hear people's voices of, what do you think you can do with the information you learned today? And I'll give a few minutes for y'all to be able to pull up Menti, or to gather your thoughts to share with us.
I'm happy to start. I think the biggest thing with things like this is, so we talked about like what structures are in place and what barriers there are, is starting to identify what really prohibits us from doing the work we do in an equitable way, and how we can start to make even small steps. Because I think, one of the questions, like fears about prioritizing equity, is that sometimes it's too big and too overwhelming, but really breaking that down into smaller steps to make decisions about what small steps can we take now, this year, this month, whatever, and actually starting to make a plan for how those steps will go.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I appreciate that. All really good points, because I do agree, it feels overwhelming. I know when I think about it and look at it, I was like, oh my gosh, where do I even start? How can I be of help and benefit? So I love the idea of bringing it down to just even one step that I can do myself where I'm standing, right? Great. So we have someone saying, try to implement alternative strategies for getting information to community members. Yes. I think some of this work requires us to be creative and innovative. It requires us to think outside the box. I do say, because I pride myself in being creative, okay? I do say being creative also requires organizational and leadership support. Because without that, I can come up with all sorts of great ideas. But if I don't have support above me to either give me the time and space for that, provide funding support for it, whatever it is, that can be a challenge. I think some of the work too sometimes requires us to build the right partnerships and championships with folks who pull the strings inside the structures, right? So some things to think about too. Okay, look, love this. Not being afraid to speak up to peers and supervisors. Yes, when I see a gap, that takes so much courage. So thanks someone for saying that. I really hope to pass on as much inspiration and courage to you, because there's a lot of vulnerability in stepping to the place of saying something and speaking up. So using my voice to advocate for examinations of the structures and barriers for our diverse, underrepresented residents. That's beautifully said. Wonderful. Wonderful. And hopefully for the person who's doing that, you are developing partnerships and friendships and collaborations, because it can get lonely when you use your voice to step up against something that hasn't been stepped up against before. So this is great. This is great. Yeah.
I think too, it's
Mhm.
also in the realm of public health where I work in, is, you know, there are a lot of disparities and issues and things, but they aren't pointedly pointed out on the paperwork that you do. So it's like you work through these things and you know that they're there, but it's not right there saying this is a disparity, this is a structure or system that needs to be changed. It's talked about, but it's not often written down. I think writing it down would make it more real for not only myself, but anyone I'm presenting the information to as well.
Okay, I like that. Thank you for sharing that, Tiffany. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to actually stop sharing the screen so I can see more of y'all's faces here. And then just to kind of open it up, if there are any other thoughts or comments or questions here, we've got about 6 minutes left together. So I tried not to take us right up until the end where we feel like we're rushing, but if folks have any closing thoughts or just some things that are, you know, marinating with you. Yeah.
I was listening to what Tiffany was saying. Like, I think what you were saying, Tiffany, is like filling out things, or so it's like from the top, a lot of times we're limited by what these age-old forms are or processes are. And it really is, you know, I'm a white woman of privilege, but most of the people look like me who do my work in our state.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of learning, self-learning I'm trying to do. And also to be mindful that I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to say the wrong things. But a lot of times the structures of what I'm mandated to do through the grant, or like the forms, or are old and outdated and limit us, I guess is how I'm going to stop.
Yeah, I understand. I do. Susanna, I saw you kind of wave at the camera. Were you trying to say something? Okay.
Just saying hello and thank you. I'm in a busy health office.
Oh, okay. No worries. Yeah, I totally get that. Well, good. Okay. Well, so if there are no other thoughts, I really do want to thank you all for your time today. And my hope is that even just this little bit of conversation we've been able to have has got you thinking. My hope is that you'll definitely come back next week to continue the conversation. Next week, I will be focusing on data. Because I do believe how we look at, use data, interpret data, even communicate data is a really powerful component of this work too. I've been learning a lot more about data, and the fact that data is used to allocate resources and funding and all sorts of stuff. So when we think about equity issues, I think it's important to have a good handle on data literacy, to really be able to say, how do I use data in a way that's going to expose the disparities that exist, but then also show areas of opportunity where, you know, if we just pay attention to something a little bit different, we can actually create some new outcomes and results for the communities we serve. So I'm a data nerd myself, so I'm excited to talk to you guys about that next week too, and share some thoughts on that. Great. Well, Carol and Elisa, I want to pass it back to you all as we kind of close up here. We just got a few minutes left.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming, for joining us. And Elisa and I are really grateful to have Nicole. I promised myself I'm not going to take time and do a lot of talking. So Elisa will be following up with an email to thank you all for coming. It will have the recording link. Please feel free to share it with your colleagues. It will also have Nicole's next Wednesday's session packet, which we're so grateful to have. And she will also remind us that it's the same Zoom link. So it'll be a concise email. And we just thank you so much for being a part of this. And we hope to do many more. So that's it. Elisa, do you have?
No, that was it for me. Just I'll send you all reminder emails because I always forget the day of. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Have a good
Thank
Wednesday,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.